What's up, guys? Today we're talking about something that pretty much no one really talks about when it comes to music production, and that is textures. I think a lot of people know what textures are already, but not many videos have been made on all sorts of different ways to implement textures to your sounds. So I have this basic piano loop that I just made earlier, and then a drum loop that we're going to play at the end once we added texture to this entire melody and chord progression. Let's just play the loop alone of the piano. So nothing too complicated, very simple stuff. So what I'm going to do now is show you the 5 different ways we can add texture to this entire loop right here. The number one thing that you should be looking for when you're making a loop is definitely adding thickness to your texture. Now, obviously, everything I say today is optional. Like, you don't have to do everything that I do. But the thing is that all these things you should know how to do because they'll make every single loop that you compose out of thin air sound a little more complicated than it actually is. So obviously this loop just sounds really basic, but we can add something called thickness to the loop. And we're going to be adding a couple notes to the chords in the bass area that will add just a little more texture to the bottom part of the sound. So this first tip is just basic music theory. You're going to take the root note of every chord and bring it down, copy paste it. So let's go E sharp here and then B, and we're going to make it an octave lower even more. So it's all in like the C1 section, and it's going to sound much lower and much thicker than before. So that just added a lot more weight to the basic harmony we already had. And what we could also do is maybe just bring this a little lower too. See how it sounds. So experimenting with your octaves will definitely give a different texture and different tonality to everything. It gives like different moods, so this is definitely like way lower and way more moody than it was before. Another trick for all these meaty notes that you do here is to actually just like move these chord notes a little bit further from the root note and just like simulate someone is actually playing on the keyboard. So it adds a little more texture and like realness to it. And obviously you can play with the velocity too to make it even more real, but I mean, that's an entire different video that I can make. You could add a couple other voices here to make it sound even more full, so you could add another F to it here, another A, like the middle note up here. It's going to make it sound a little cooler. This is D, yeah. So just more voices add more texture and more emotion to your loops. This is the most effective way in terms of music theory to add your textures. And now I'm going to go on to stuff that's more like experimental and my way of adding textures, because this first tip is like literally just music theory, but now we're going to get on to more like the spicy stuff that not many people know about. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an audio track and add some texture, literally add a piece of texture to the audio track. So I'm going to use a sample that I downloaded earlier, which is a school cafeteria. And I know that sounds really dumb, but if you just take this sound and any sample, you could even sample a song if you want. Those sound cool too. So it's not going to sound like much at first, but here, I'm going to lower the audio. So that kind of sounds really dumb. Whoops. But what we could do is just EQ out a lot of frequencies to let the piano really be at the forefront of everything, and just let maybe the highs stay for the cafeteria. And that's going to add a little bit of like, let's say, white noise to the sound and just extra little spiciness to the loop itself. We don't necessarily want to hear that it's a cafeteria, but it just adds an extra little bit of sound and like noise to artificially create like an atmosphere and just like more sounds that make the loop a little more complicated. So this is definitely one way of doing it. So another way of adding more texture would just be distortion itself. So you can just grab any kind of distortion. There's overdrive, vinyl distortion. You can even do erosion. This literally just adds more texture. Let's say white noise or just noise in general. There you go. The piano sounds broken now. So you can use erosion, if you don't have erosion, you can just use distortion, so overdrive. Now that depends how much distortion you really want. I personally like the erosion a lot to add some texture. So another thing to add a little more texture again would be just to simply put some reverb. I know that sounds really basic, but it literally is. So you can add a little reverb and it just adds texture on top of more texture that you put. So reverb and delay. If the reverb doesn't really work, and it doesn't pop because there's too much noise, then take off the reverb and then add some delay because maybe those high pitch notes could really pop out. You know what I mean? We're gonna put it only on the high frequency for it and make those high pitch notes pop out more. So now the last thing that you can add to the loop to add more texture, again, would be to use another audio track and add like a sample, but now not a looping sample, but like a one shot. So let's say a Vox. I've been doing this a lot lately. So let's just write Vox in here. You can literally just add that. And it just adds a little spiciness to the loop, you know what I mean? So let's just grab this, pitch it down if you want. And then take some delay, add a little delay to it. Ping pong. And there you go. We got a nice loop. We add the drums. Now that's how you make your loops sound much more complicated than they actually are. The drums do sound like they have texture as well. I mean, the sample's pre-made, but you can literally apply all these things to your snares, to your kicks, whatever, you know, like all that distortion, all this, and just use all these kinds of one-shots to add textures to your sound. I hope you guys learned a little something. My top 5 tips on adding texture to your music. Subscribe for more music production content. Go check out my music in the description down below. My name is Tiny, and as always, I'm signing out.